She was the kind of sailor who kept the Navy running but never drew attention. Katherine Sullivan, on the other hand, had been a legend. The walk to Hangar 7 felt like a march to execution. Each step brought back memories she had spent 8 years trying to bury. The smell of hydraulic fluid, the thunder of afterburners, the weight of a helmet in her hands, and the feel of a control stick responding to her slightest touch. And always, always the memory of that last mission, the one that had destroyed everything. Hangar 7 loomed before her, its massive doors thrown wide to reveal 6 gleaming FA-18 Super Hornets in their iconic blue and gold livery. The sight hit her like a physical blow. These weren't just aircraft. They were works of art, each one representing the pinnacle of naval aviation and the dreams of every pilot who had ever looked up at the sky and wanted to touch the clouds. "You must be Mitchell." The voice was younger than she expected, confident in the way that only came from years in the cockpit. Sarah turned slowly and her world tilted on its axis. Lieutenant Commander Jake Thompson stood before her in his blue flight suit, his dark hair regulation short, his brown eyes sharp with intelligence and something else, something that looked uncomfortably like recognition. He was taller than his father had been, broader in the shoulders, but the resemblance was unmistakable. The same strong jaw, the same way of standing with his weight and buoyantly forward ready to move, the same crooked smile that had once made her believe that everything would be all right. "Yes, sir, Senior Chief Mitchell reporting for duty." She kept her voice steady, professional, but inside she was screaming. This was Captain Mark Thompson's son, grown up, wearing the wings his father had died trying to protect. The paint job was flawless, the canopy spotless, the control surfaces aligned with mathematical precision, but she could see things that most maintenance chiefs would miss. The slight discoloration around the leading edge of the starboard wing that indicated stress, the microscopic scoring on the canopy that suggested the pilot had been flying in dusty conditions. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Jake's voice held the reverence that all true pilots felt for their machines. "Blue Angel 1, she's been in the fleet for 6 years, but she flies like she rolled off the production line yesterday." "The maintenance crew does excellent work," Sarah replied carefully. "They do, but you can tell a lot about an aircraft by how someone looks at her. Most people see the paint job, the showmanship, but you—" Jake paused, studying her face. "You're looking at her like you're reading her biography." Danger. Sarah forced herself to relax, to dial back the intensity of her examination. "Just being thorough, sir. The Blue Angels deserve the best maintenance support we can provide." "They do indeed." Jake's tone remained conversational, but Sarah sensed an undercurrent of something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or suspicion. "You know, I had the strangest feeling when I saw you. Like I should know you from somewhere. Did you ever fly?" The question hit like a hammer blow, but Sarah had prepared for this moment for 8 years. "No, sir, never had the aptitude for it. I'm much better with my feet on the ground and my hands in an engine compartment." It was partially true. Katherine Sullivan had always been better with her hands in a cockpit, but she had possessed an almost supernatural understanding of aircraft systems. She could diagnose problems by the sound of an engine, feel stress fractures through the skin of an aircraft, read the story of every flight in the wear patterns on control surfaces. Interesting. Jake moved to the next aircraft, Blue Angel 2. "This one's mine. She's got about 50 hours more on her than the others, and she's developing a slight vibration in the port engine at high RPM. Nothing dangerous, but I'd like to have someone take a look." Sarah nodded, already knowing what the problem was. A slight imbalance in the fan blades, probably caused by debris ingestion during a low-level pass. It was a common issue easily fixed with a blade replacement and rebalancing, but she couldn't demonstrate that knowledge without revealing far more than she could afford. "I'll have the engine crew run a full diagnostic," she said instead. "Good. And Sarah, can I call you Sarah?" "Of course, sir. I have a feeling we're going to be working closely together over the next few weeks." The Blue Angels are preparing for our biggest show of the season, and I want everything perfect. No surprises, no glitches, no problems that could compromise safety or performance." "Understood, sir." As they continued the walk through, Sarah found herself slipping into a dangerous rhythm. Jake's questions about the aircraft were intelligent and detailed, the kind that could only come from someone who truly understood the machines he flew. And despite her best efforts to remain unremarkable, she found herself responding with the depth of knowledge that had once made her one of the Navy's most respected pilots. "The hydraulic pressure readings on Blue Angel 4 have been running slightly high," Jake mentioned as they approached the fourth aircraft. "Nothing outside acceptable parameters, but it's been consistent for the last 3 flights." "Could be a restriction in the return line," Sarah replied without thinking. "Or possibly degraded seals in the primary accumulator. I'd recommend checking the filter screens first. If there's contamination in the system, it would cause exactly that kind of pressure buildup." Jake stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "That's a very specific diagnosis for someone who just looked at the aircraft." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She had revealed too much demonstrated knowledge that went far beyond what a maintenance chief should possess. "I've seen similar issues before, sir. The FA-18 hydraulic system is pretty standardized across all variants." "Yes, it is." Jake's voice was quiet, thoughtful. "But that kind of analysis usually comes from someone who's felt the problem through the controls, not just read about it in maintenance manuals." Before Sarah could respond, a voice cut through the hangar like a whip crack. "Thompson." Both Jake and Sarah turned to see a figure striding across the hangar floor with the kind of authority that made junior officers scramble to attention. Admiral Eleanor Patterson was 62 years old, gray-haired, and possessed the kind of presence that could stop conversations in rooms full of admirals. She was also, Sarah knew, one of the few people in the Navy who might still remember Lieutenant Commander Katherine Sullivan. "Admiral on deck," Jake called out, and every sailor in the hangar snapped to attention. "As you were," Patterson said, her eyes scanning the hangar before settling on Jake. "Commander Thompson, I need to speak with you, privately." Sarah felt the weight of Patterson's gaze as it passed over her, and for a terrifying moment she was certain that 8 years of careful hiding had just come to an end. But Patterson's expression remained neutral, professional, and she gave no sign of recognition. "Of course, Admiral. Chief Mitchell, please continue the inspection. I'll catch up with you later." "Yes, sir." Sarah watched as Jake and Patterson walked toward the hangar offices, their heads close together in conversation. Whatever they were discussing, it was serious enough to bring a 2-star admiral down to the flight line personally, and Sarah had a sinking feeling that it might have something to do with her. Alone with the aircraft, Sarah allowed herself a moment of weakness. She approached Blue Angel 1 and placed her palm flat against the fuselage, feeling the cool metal beneath her hand. These machines had once been hers to command the sky, her natural element. She had led formations that brought tears to the eyes of spectators, had pushed the envelope of what was possible in ways that redefined the art of demonstration flying, and she had paid for that excellence with everything she held dear. "Miss it, do you?" Sarah spun around to find an elderly man watching her from the shadows near the hangar entrance. He was civilian dress, but something about his bearing suggested military service. He was perhaps 70 years old, with steel-gray hair and eyes that held the kind of wisdom that came from seeing too much of the world's darkness. "I'm sorry, sir. This is a restricted area." "Earl Washington," the man said, extending his hand. "Retired Master Chief, and I've got clearance to be here. I'm helping with the air show setup." Sarah shook his hand cautiously. "Senior Chief Mitchell. I'm the maintenance liaison for the Blue Angels." "Mitchell, huh?" Earl's eyes were sharp, penetrating. "You know, I've been around this business for 45 years, and I've learned to read people pretty well. And the way you were looking at that aircraft, that wasn't the look of someone who services them. That was the look of someone who's flown them." The accusation was quiet matter-of-fact, and infinitely more dangerous than Jake's curiosity. Sarah forced herself to remain calm. I appreciate aircraft, Master Chief, always have, but I've never been qualified as a pilot. No, I suppose you haven't. Not anymore. Earl stepped closer, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something in his eyes. Not suspicion, but recognition, and something else. Sympathy. Tell me, Chief Mitchell, what do you know about Katherine Sullivan? The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. For 8 years, no one had spoken that name in her presence. She was Sarah Mitchell, unremarkable and forgotten. Katherine Sullivan was dead buried, erased from history, except as a cautionary tale about pilots who flew too close to the sun. I know the official story, Sarah said carefully. Brilliant pilot, first woman to lead the Blue Angels, died in a training accident after being investigated for treason. The official story. Earl's voice was bitter. And do you believe it? Sarah met his gaze steadily. I believe that sometimes good people get caught up in situations beyond their control. Earl nodded slowly. Yes, they do. And sometimes those situations destroy innocent lives to protect guilty ones. Katherine Sullivan was many things, Chief Mitchell, but a traitor wasn't one of them. Why are you telling me this, Master Chief? Because I think you might be one of the few people who would understand. And because... Earl paused, studying her face with uncomfortable intensity. Because I have a feeling that Katherine Sullivan's story isn't over yet. Before Sarah could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hangar. Jake Thompson was returning, his expression troubled, and Sarah noticed that Admiral Patterson was no longer with him. Chief Mitchell, Jake called out as he approached. Change of plans. Admiral Patterson wants to accelerate our preparation schedule. We're moving the first practice session up to tomorrow morning, and she wants a full maintenance review of all aircraft by 0800 hours. That's unusual, Earl observed. The Blue Angels typically stick to their established prep schedule. Jake's expression was grim. These aren't typical circumstances. There have been some security concerns raised. Nothing specific, but enough to warrant extra precautions. Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Security concerns. Accelerated schedules. Admiral Patterson's unexpected visit. The pieces were moving on a board she couldn't see, and she had a terrifying suspicion that she might be one of the pieces. I'll make sure the aircraft are ready, sir, she said. I know you will. And Chief, Jake's eyes locked onto hers. I want you personally overseeing every aspect of the maintenance. No detail is too small, no system too minor to check twice. The pilots' lives depend on getting this right. Understood, sir. As Jake walked away, Earl moved closer to Sarah. You know, he said quietly, there's an old saying in the Navy, the sea always gives up her dead. But sometimes what she gives back isn't what everyone expected. Sarah didn't respond, but as she watched Earl disappear into the shadows, she felt the weight of 8 years of carefully constructed lies pressing down on her shoulders. The Blue Angels were back in Pensacola. Jake Thompson was asking dangerous questions, and Admiral Patterson was implementing security measures that suggested someone somewhere suspected that the dead don't always stay buried. As the sun climbed higher over the Gulf Coast, Sarah Mitchell began her inspection of the Blue Angels aircraft with the methodical precision that had kept her alive for 8 years. But beneath the surface, Katherine Sullivan was stirring to life, and she brought with her all the fury and determination that had once made her the most feared pilot in the Navy. The ghosts of Pensacola were walking again, and before this was over, the truth about what happened 8 years ago would either set her free or destroy what little life she had managed to build from the ashes of her former existence. The Blue Angels would fly again tomorrow, carrying with them the hopes and dreams of everyone who had ever looked up at the sky and wondered what it would be like to touch the face of God. But they would also carry the weight of a conspiracy that had murdered good men and buried inconvenient truths beneath layers of official lies and classified reports. And Sarah Mitchell, who had once been Katherine Sullivan, who had once worn the wings of gold, who had once believed that honor and courage were enough to triumph over corruption and deceit, would be watching from the ground, knowing that every maneuver, every formation, every moment of precision flying was a reminder of everything she had lost, and everything she might still have the chance to reclaim. The storm that had been brewing for 8 years was finally about to break, and when it did, the skies over Pensacola would never be the same again. The maintenance bay hummed with activity as Sarah worked through the night, her hands moving with practiced precision over Blue Angel 1's port engine. The fan blades gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, each one carefully balanced and inspected with the kind of attention to detail that separated the Blue Angels from every other demonstration team in the world. But as she torqued down the final bolt on the engine, cowling, her mind wasn't on the mechanical perfection before her, it was on the conversation she had overheard 3 hours earlier. "The Sullivan file is being reopened." Admiral Patterson's voice had carried clearly through the thin walls of the hangar office, and Sarah had frozen at her workbench, a wrench forgotten in her hand. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, had simply been working late to meet Jake's accelerated maintenance schedule, but the words had hit her like a physical blow. "Ma'am, Katherine Sullivan died 8 years ago," Jake had replied, his voice carefully neutral. "The investigation was closed, the case file sealed." Cases get reopened, Commander, when new evidence surfaces. And yesterday, someone with considerable resources and even more considerable interest in military aviation started asking very specific questions about the circumstances surrounding Lieutenant Commander Sullivan's death. Sarah had crept closer to the office, her heart hammering against her ribs. For 8 years, no one had questioned the official story. Katherine Sullivan had died in a training accident after being investigated for selling classified information to foreign intelligence services. The investigation had been thorough, the conclusion definitive, the file buried so deep that most people had forgotten she had ever existed. What kind of questions, Jake had asked? The kind that suggests someone believes she might still be alive. The words had sent ice through Sarah's veins. She had backed away from the office, her hands shaking, and thrown herself into her work with desperate intensity. But the conversation had continued, Patterson's voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many secrets destroyed by inconvenient truths. "Sir, with all due respect, that's impossible. I've read the file. Her aircraft exploded over the Gulf of Mexico. The debris field was recovered. Her body was never found, but given the circumstances." "The circumstances were manufactured, Commander Thompson." Patterson's voice had turned sharp, dangerous. "And before you ask how I know, understand that there are some things in this world that take 8 years to surface, and when they do, they have a tendency to destroy everyone who was involved in covering them up." Now, as Sarah finished her inspection and prepared to move to the next aircraft, she found herself replaying every word of that conversation. Someone was asking questions, someone with resources, and Admiral Patterson, who had been a captain 8 years ago and had known Katherine Sullivan personally, seemed to believe that the official story was a lie. "Working late again, Chief Mitchell." Sarah spun around to find Jake Thompson standing in the entrance to the maintenance bay, his flight suit replaced by civilian clothes, jeans, and a Navy flight jacket that had seen better years. His dark hair was disheveled, and there were lines of exhaustion around his eyes that suggested he had been having the same kind of sleepless night that had become Sarah's constant companion. "Just making sure everything's perfect for tomorrow's practice, sir." The port engine on Blue Angel 1 was showing some vibration characteristics that needed attention. Jake moved closer, his eyes scanning the work area with the practiced gaze of someone who understood both aircraft and the people who maintained them. "Find anything interesting?" "Minor imbalance in the fan assembly. Already corrected." Sarah kept her voice professional, but something in Jake's tone suggested this wasn't a routine check on his maintenance crew. "Good, that's the kind of attention to detail that keeps pilots alive." Jake paused beside the aircraft, his hand resting on the fuselage in the same unconscious gesture that Sarah had made earlier. "Can I ask you something, Chief?" Every instinct Sarah had developed over 8 years of hiding screamed at her to deflect, to remain unremarkable, to give whatever answer would end this conversation as quickly as possible. But Jake's expression held something that looked uncomfortably like pain, and she found herself nodding. Earlier today, when Admiral Patterson and I were talking, she mentioned something that's been bothering me all evening. She said that my father didn't die in a training accident the way I'd always been told. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Captain Mark Thompson had died trying to protect her, had been murdered for his loyalty and his refusal to participate in a conspiracy that went to the highest levels of the Navy. But the official story was that he had suffered mechanical failure during a routine training flight, had crashed into the Gulf of Mexico in an accident that was tragic but not suspicious. I'm sorry for your loss, sir, but I'm not sure what you're asking me. I'm asking if you think it's possible for the Navy to lie about something that fundamental, to take a man's death and turn it into a convenient fiction to protect someone else's career. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Sarah couldn't acknowledge without destroying everything she had built over the past 8 years. But as she looked at Jake's face, she saw the same expression she had seen on his father's face all those years ago. The look of a man who was beginning to understand that the institution he served might not be as honorable as he had believed. I think, Sarah said carefully, that good men sometimes die for reasons that the people who survive them can't afford to acknowledge. And I think that when that happens, the truth becomes whatever the survivors need it to be. Jake stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah saw recognition flickering in his eyes, not recognition of her face, but recognition of someone who had seen the same dark corners of the world that he was just beginning to discover. You sound like you speak from experience. Everyone in the military speaks from experience, sir. The question is what kind of experience they're willing to talk about. Before Jake could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hangar. Earl Washington emerged from the shadows, his civilian clothes replaced by a maintenance uniform that looked like it had been tailored specifically for him. The transformation was startling. The elderly retiree was gone, replaced by someone who moved with the kind of purpose that Sarah recognized from her own years in uniform. Commander Thompson, Earl said, his voice carrying an authority that made Jake straighten unconsciously. We need to talk. Master Chief Washington, I thought you were coordinating air show setup. I am, among other things. Earl's eyes flicked to Sarah, and she saw a warning in them that made her skin crawl. Chief Mitchell, you might want to hear this too. It concerns the security briefing that Admiral Patterson gave the command staff this afternoon. Sarah felt the walls of her carefully constructed life beginning to crumble. I don't have security clearance for command briefings, Master Chief. You do now. Earl reached into his jacket and withdrew a folder that bore the kind of classification markings that Sarah hadn't seen in 8 years. Admiral Patterson has temporarily upgraded your clearance for the duration of the air show. Apparently, she believes you might have insights that could prove valuable. Jake took the folder and opened it, his expression growing darker with each page. Jesus Christ, how is this possible? What is it? Sarah asked, though part of her already knew. Intelligence reports suggesting that there may be a security threat directed at the Blue Angels during the air show. Someone with detailed knowledge of our flight patterns, our security protocols, our maintenance procedures. Jake looked up from the folder, his eyes locking onto Sarah's. Someone who knows us better than we know ourselves. Earl nodded grimly. The intelligence is fragmentary, but it suggests that this isn't random. Someone with a personal vendetta against the Blue Angels, or against specific individuals associated with the team. What kind of vendetta? Sarah asked, though she was beginning to understand the shape of the trap that was closing around her. The kind that might motivate someone who was wrongly accused of treason 8 years ago, someone who lost everything because of false accusations and manufactured evidence. Someone who might want revenge against the people who destroyed her life. The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Sarah felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in around her. This was how it had started 8 years ago. Whispered suspicions, classified intelligence reports, the gradual accumulation of circumstantial evidence that painted an innocent person as a traitor. "You're talking about Katherine Sullivan," Jake said quietly. "I'm talking about the possibility that Katherine Sullivan didn't die in that training accident, that she's been alive all this time, planning, waiting, preparing for the right moment to strike back at the people who wronged her." Sarah forced herself to remain calm, to project the confusion and concern that any loyal sailor would feel when confronted with this kind of information. But that's impossible. The investigation was thorough. Her aircraft exploded. The debris was recovered. "The debris of an aircraft was recovered," Earl corrected. "But aircraft can be sabotaged to explode on command. Bodies can be faked. Deaths can be staged by people with the right resources and the right motivation." "And you think she's targeting the Blue Angels?" Jake asked. "I think she's targeting the institution that destroyed her life. And the Blue Angels represent everything she lost. The pinnacle of naval aviation, the respect of her peers, the chance to serve her country with honor." Earl's eyes never left Sarah's face as he spoke. "If Katherine Sullivan is alive, if she's been planning revenge for 8 years, then tomorrow's practice session would be the perfect opportunity to strike." Sarah felt the net tightening around her, felt the weight of 8 years of carefully constructed lies beginning to collapse under the pressure of paranoia and manufactured intelligence. But there was something wrong with this scenario, something that didn't fit the pattern she remembered from her own destruction. "Master Chief," she said carefully, "if Katherine Sullivan wanted revenge against the Navy, why would she target the pilots? They weren't the ones who accused her of treason." Earl's expression didn't change, but Sarah caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or recognition that she was asking the right questions. "Because pilots are symbols, Chief Mitchell. They represent everything that the Navy stands for: honor, courage, excellence. Destroy the symbol and you destroy the institution." But Jake was shaking his head, his expression troubled. "That doesn't sound right. From everything I've read about Katherine Sullivan, she wasn't someone who would target innocent people. Her record shows someone who went to extraordinary lengths to protect her fellow pilots." "People change, Commander. 8 years of believing that your country betrayed you, that your fellow officers abandoned you, that everything you sacrificed for was meaningless. That kind of betrayal can twist even the most honorable person into something dark." Sarah watched this exchange with growing unease. Earl Washington was playing a game that she didn't understand, feeding information to Jake that seemed designed to paint Katherine Sullivan as a threat while simultaneously defending her character. And Jake was responding exactly as his father would have, with skepticism toward easy answers and loyalty toward people who had earned his respect. "There's something else," Earl continued, reaching into the folder and withdrawing a photograph that made Sarah's heart stop. It was a surveillance photo, grainy and indistinct, but clearly showing a woman entering the base through the main gate. The woman's face was partially obscured by shadows, but her build, her posture, the way she carried herself, it could have been Katherine Sullivan. It could have been Sarah Mitchell. "This was taken yesterday morning," Earl said. "Base security didn't flag it because the woman had proper identification and clearance. But when the intelligence about Sullivan surfaced, someone thought to run facial recognition software on all personnel who had accessed the base in the last week." Jake studied the photograph with growing intensity. The software found a match, a possible match. 67% probability that this woman is Katherine Sullivan. Sarah felt the world tilting around her. The photograph was real. She remembered entering the base yesterday morning, had worried about the security cameras, had consoled herself with the knowledge that Sarah Mitchell had every right to be there. But now that photograph was being used as evidence that Katherine Sullivan had returned from the dead to threaten the Blue Angels. 67% isn't definitive, Jake pointed out. No, it isn't. But combined with the other intelligence, it's enough to warrant serious precautions. Admiral Patterson is implementing enhanced security protocols for tomorrow's practice session. All personnel will be subjected to additional screening. All maintenance activities will be supervised by security personnel, and any individual who shows detailed knowledge of Blue Angel's procedures will be flagged for additional investigation. The trap was complete. Sarah could see it now, a carefully constructed web of circumstantial evidence and manufactured intelligence designed to flush Katherine Sullivan out of hiding by making it impossible for her to continue living as Sarah Mitchell. Every demonstration of expertise, every moment of competence, every instance of the knowledge that made her valuable as a maintenance chief would now be seen as evidence of her true identity. Commander Thompson, Earl continued, Admiral Patterson specifically requested that you personally oversee the investigation. Apparently, she believes that your father's connection to the original Sullivan case gives you unique insights into her motivations and capabilities. Jake's face went pale. My father's connection. Captain Mark Thompson was Katherine Sullivan's wingman and closest friend. He was also the only person who publicly defended her innocence during the original investigation. Earl's voice became gentle, almost sympathetic. He died 2 weeks after Sullivan's supposed death in what was officially ruled a training accident. You're saying his death wasn't accidental. I'm saying that a lot of people died around the time of Katherine Sullivan's investigation. People who asked inconvenient questions, people who refused to accept the official story, people who threatened to expose the truth about what really happened. Sarah watched Jake process this information, saw the moment when the pieces clicked into place in his mind. His father hadn't died in an accident. He had been murdered for his loyalty to Katherine Sullivan, and now Jake was being asked to hunt down the woman his father had died trying to protect. If Sullivan is alive, Jake said slowly, if she's been hiding for 8 years, then she knows that coming back exposes her to discovery and arrest. Why would she take that risk? Earl smiled, and for the first time Sarah saw something genuinely warm in his expression. Maybe she's tired of hiding. Maybe 8 years of living as someone else has finally worn her down. Or maybe she's realized that the only way to clear her name is to expose the people who framed her in the first place. The words hit Sarah like a revelation. Earl Washington wasn't hunting Katherine Sullivan. He was trying to draw her out. The intelligence reports, the surveillance photographs, the enhanced security protocols. They were all part of an elaborate performance designed to force her to reveal herself. But for what purpose? To arrest her or to help her, Master Chief? Jake said carefully. Are you suggesting that Katherine Sullivan might be innocent? I'm suggesting that the truth about what happened 8 years ago is more complicated than the official story would have us believe. And I'm suggesting that if Katherine Sullivan is alive, if she's here at Pensacola, then she might be the key to exposing a conspiracy that goes to the very top of the Navy's command structure. Jake looked from Earl to Sarah, his expression troubled. And you think she might try to make contact during the air show? I think she might already have. The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Sarah felt Earl's eyes boring into her soul. He knew. Somehow, someway, Earl Washington knew exactly who she was. But instead of arresting her, instead of exposing her, he was playing an elaborate game that she didn't understand. Chief Mitchell, Earl said quietly, you've been very quiet during this conversation. Do you have any thoughts on how someone like Katherine Sullivan might approach a situation like this? It was a test, Sarah realized. Earl was giving her an opportunity to reveal herself, to step forward and claim her true identity. But it was also a trap. One wrong word, one moment of knowledge that Sarah Mitchell shouldn't possess, and her 8 years of hiding would be over. I think, Sarah said carefully, that anyone who had been wrongly accused of treason would be very careful about exposing themselves. They would need proof of their innocence, evidence that could clear their name and protect them from retaliation. And where might someone like that find such evidence? Sarah met Earl's gaze steadily, and in that moment she made a decision that would change everything. They might start by looking for the people who were involved in the original conspiracy. The people who had the power to manufacture evidence and cover up murders. People like Admiral Rodriguez. The name hit the air like a thunderclap. Admiral Eduardo Rodriguez had been a captain 8 years ago, had been part of the investigation that had destroyed Katherine Sullivan's life. He was now the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations, one of the most powerful men in the Navy, and if Earl was suggesting what Sarah thought he was suggesting. Rodriguez framed Katherine Sullivan, Jake asked. Rodriguez was part of a conspiracy that involved selling classified information to foreign intelligence services. When Katherine Sullivan stumbled onto evidence of that conspiracy, they silenced her by turning her into the traitor, and when your father refused to participate in the cover-up, they silenced him too. Sarah felt the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. The real conspiracy had never been about Katherine Sullivan selling secrets. It had been about other people selling secrets and using Katherine as a scapegoat. Her exemplary record, her high-level clearances, her access to classified information had made her the perfect fall guy for someone else's crimes. "How do you know all this?" Jake demanded. "Because I've spent 8 years investigating what really happened. Because I never believed that Katherine Sullivan was a traitor, and because I recently came into possession of evidence that proves her innocence and exposes the real criminals." Earl reached into his jacket again and withdrew a small digital device that Sarah recognized as an encrypted data storage unit, the kind used for the most sensitive military intelligence. This contains copies of financial records, communication logs, and classified documents that prove Admiral Rodriguez and his co-conspirators were selling information to foreign intelligence services from 2015 to 2017. It also contains evidence that Katherine Sullivan discovered the conspiracy and was preparing to expose it when she was framed. Jake stared at the device as if it were a live grenade. "Where did you get this?" "From someone who was part of the original conspiracy but developed a conscience. Someone who couldn't live with the knowledge that innocent people had died to protect his secrets." Earl's voice was grim. "He contacted me 3 months ago, turned over everything he had, and then disappeared. 2 weeks later, his body was found in a hotel room in Norfolk, apparent suicide." "But you don't believe it was suicide?" "I believe that Admiral Rodriguez is still cleaning up loose ends, and I believe that Katherine Sullivan is the biggest loose end of all." Sarah felt the weight of 8 years of secrets pressing down on her shoulders. Everything Earl was saying aligned with what she had suspected, with the fragments of truth she had managed to piece together during her years in hiding. But it also meant that the conspiracy was still active, still dangerous, still willing to kill to protect itself. "What do you want from us?" Jake asked. "I want you to help me draw Katherine Sullivan out of hiding. If she's alive, if she's here at Pensacola, then she needs to know that there are people who believe in her innocence and are willing to fight for her." Jake looked from Earl to Sarah, his expression troubled. "And if she doesn't come forward, if she's too afraid, or if she doesn't trust us?" Earl's smile was sad understanding. "Then Katherine Sullivan will remain dead, and the people who destroyed her life will continue to escape justice. But if she has half the courage that her reputation suggests, if she's willing to risk everything for the truth." He paused, his eyes locking onto Sarah's. "Then tomorrow's practice session might be more interesting than anyone expects." As Earl walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the hangar, Sarah found herself alone with Jake Thompson, the son of the man who had died, trying to save her. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and dangerous truths. "Chief Mitchell," Jake said, finally, "I know we don't know each other well, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "Of course, sir." "Do you believe Katherine Sullivan was innocent?" The question hung in the air like a lifeline. Sarah could feel the weight of 8 years of hiding pressing down on her shoulders, could sense the moment of truth approaching like a storm front on the horizon. In a few hours, the sun would rise over Pensacola Naval Air Station, The Blue Angels would take to the sky, and everything she had built in the aftermath of her destruction would either be validated or annihilated. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "I believe Katherine Sullivan was innocent, and I believe that the people who framed her are still out there, still dangerous, still willing to kill to protect their secrets." Jake nodded slowly, and Sarah saw something change in his expression. A hardening of resolve, a recognition of duty that went beyond regulations and official orders. "Then we have work to do, Chief Mitchell. Because if Earl Washington is right, if Katherine Sullivan is alive and ready to come forward, then she's going to need all the help she can get." As Jake walked away, Sarah remained alone in the maintenance bay, with the gleaming aircraft that had once been her domain. Tomorrow the Blue Angels would fly again, carrying with them the dreams and aspirations of everyone who had ever looked up at the sky and wondered what it would be like to touch the face of God. But they would also carry the weight of a conspiracy that had murdered good men and buried inconvenient truths beneath layers of official lies and classified reports. And Sarah Mitchell, who had once been Katherine Sullivan, who had once worn the wings of gold, who had once believed that honor and courage were enough to triumph over corruption and deceit, would finally have to decide whether to remain dead or to step forward into the light and reclaim her name. The ghosts of Pensacola were stirring, and the dawn would bring with it either redemption or destruction. But for the first time in 8 years, Sarah Mitchell allowed herself to hope that the truth might finally be strong enough to overcome the lies that had destroyed her life. The pre-dawn darkness over Pensacola Naval Air Station was broken only by the harsh white lights illuminating the flight line where 6 Blue Angels FA-18 Super Hornets sat in perfect formation like sleeping predators waiting for the sun. Sarah had not slept. She had spent the remaining hours before dawn in the maintenance bay, her hands moving with mechanical precision over final systems checks, while her mind raced through the implications of everything Earl Washington had revealed. At 0530 hours, the base began to stir with the controlled chaos that preceded any major aviation event. Ground crews moved with practiced efficiency, fuel trucks rumbled across the tarmac, and the distinctive whine of auxiliary power units filled the morning air. But beneath the routine activity, Sarah sensed an undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with normal pre-flight preparations. Security personnel were everywhere, far more than any routine practice session would require. They moved in pairs, their eyes constantly scanning their radios, crackling with coded communications. Admiral Patterson's enhanced security protocols were clearly in effect, and every person on the flight line was being watched, evaluated, categorized. "Chief Mitchell, report to the command post." The voice belonged to a young ensign whose crisp uniform and nervous demeanor marked him as recently graduated from the Naval Academy. Sarah recognized the type, bright, eager, and completely out of his depth in any situation that deviated from textbook procedures. "On my way," Sarah replied, wiping her hands on a maintenance rag and trying to project the calm competence that had kept her invisible for 8 years. The command post had been established in a temporary trailer adjacent to the main hangar, its interior filled with communications equipment displays, showing weather data and air traffic information, and a cluster of officers who looked like they hadn't slept any better than Sarah had. Admiral Patterson stood at the center of it all, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her uniform bearing the kind of crisp perfection that came from decades of military discipline. "Chief Mitchell," Patterson said, without looking up from a classified briefing folder, "thank you for joining us. I trust your final maintenance checks went smoothly." "Yes, ma'am, all aircraft are mission ready." Patterson finally raised her eyes, and Sarah felt the full weight of a 2-star admiral's attention focused on her with uncomfortable intensity. This was the same woman who had known Katherine Sullivan, who had worked with her, who had perhaps been the only senior officer to question the official story of her death. "Excellent. Before we proceed with this morning's practice session, I want to review the security protocols with all key personnel." Patterson gestured to a wall-mounted display that showed a detailed diagram of the practice area. Intelligence suggests that there may be individuals on or near this base who represent a potential threat to the Blue Angels demonstration team. Jake Thompson stood near the back of the room, his flight suit immaculate, his expression carefully neutral. But Sarah caught his eye and saw something there, a question perhaps, or a warning. Whatever Earl Washington had set in motion the night before was coming to a head. The threat assessment indicates that the individual or individuals involved have extensive knowledge of naval aviation procedures, security protocols, and Blue Angels flight patterns. Patterson continued, "This suggests either inside information or someone with significant operational experience." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Every word of Patterson's briefing could have been describing Katherine Sullivan, or more accurately describing the person Katherine Sullivan had been before her life was destroyed. The trap that Earl had described was closing with methodical precision. All maintenance personnel will be accompanied by security escorts during their duties. All communications will be monitored. Any individual who demonstrates knowledge beyond their stated qualifications will be detained for questioning. Patterson's eyes seemed to linger on Sarah for a moment longer than necessary. "Are there any questions, ma'am?" Jake raised his hand. "What's the specific nature of the threat? Are we talking about sabotage, an attack on personnel, or something else?" "The intelligence is fragmentary, Commander Thompson, but it suggests the possibility of someone attempting to disrupt the practice session in order to send a message. The exact nature of that message is unclear." Sarah forced herself to remain still to project the appropriate level of concern and confusion that any loyal sailor would feel in this situation. But her mind was racing through possibilities, trying to understand the game that was being played around her. Earl Washington believed that Katherine Sullivan needed to be drawn out of hiding, but Patterson's security measures seemed designed to make that impossible. "Chief Mitchell," Patterson said suddenly, "you'll be accompanying Commander Thompson during the pre-flight inspection. I want someone with your level of expertise personally verifying that each aircraft is exactly as it should be." "Yes, ma'am." As the briefing concluded and personnel began filing out of the command post, Sarah found herself walking beside Jake toward the flight line. The morning sun was beginning to paint the eastern horizon with shades of pink and gold, and the Gulf breeze carried the familiar scents of salt air and aviation fuel. "Chief," Jake said quietly as they approached the aircraft, "I've been thinking about our conversation last night, sir, about truth and lies and the things that people do to protect their careers." Jake stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "I did some research after you left. About Katherine Sullivan, about my father's death, about the timeline of events 8 years ago." Sarah's heart began to pound, but she kept her expression neutral. "What did you find?" "I found a lot of inconsistencies. Questions that were never answered, witnesses who were never interviewed, evidence that was never examined." Jake's voice was low, intense. "I found the kind of gaps in the official record that usually indicate a cover-up." Before Sarah could respond, a new voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Commander Thompson, I need to speak with you immediately." Both Sarah and Jake turned to see a figure approaching from the direction of the command post. Admiral Rodriguez walked with the kind of confident stride that came from 30 years of successful naval career, his uniform displaying enough ribbons and decorations to outfit a small museum. But there was something in his eyes that Sarah recognized, the look of a predator who had caught the scent of prey. "Admiral Rodriguez," Jake replied, coming to attention. "I wasn't expecting you until the air show tomorrow." "Plans change, Commander, especially when sensitive intelligence suggests that we may have a security situation that requires immediate attention." Rodriguez's eyes flicked to Sarah, and she saw recognition there, not of her face, but of her potential significance. "Chief Mitchell, isn't it?" "Yes, sir. I understand you've been assigned as maintenance liaison to the Blue Angels. Quite an honor for someone with your background. Rodriguez's tone was conversational, but Sarah heard the threat beneath the surface. Tell me, Chief, how long have you been stationed at Pensacola? 8 years, sir. 8 years. Interesting timing. Rodriguez smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That would place your arrival here right around the time of the Katherine Sullivan incident. Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. This wasn't coincidence. Rodriguez knew exactly who she was, had probably known from the moment her name appeared on the Blue Angels maintenance roster. The only question was why he was choosing to reveal that knowledge now in front of Jake Thompson. I transferred here from Norfolk, sir. Routine rotation. Of course. And I'm sure your service record reflects that transfer was completely voluntary and unrelated to any complications at your previous duty station. Jake stepped forward, his expression darkening. Admiral, is there something specific you need from Chief Mitchell? We have a practice session to prepare for. Rodriguez's attention shifted to Jake, and Sarah saw something dangerous flicker in his eyes. Actually, Commander Thompson, there's something I need from both of you. I need you to understand that the security of this operation is paramount, and that anyone who compromises that security will be dealt with swiftly and permanently. The threat was unmistakable, delivered with the kind of casual authority that Rodriguez had clearly been using to intimidate subordinates for decades. But Jake didn't back down. With all due respect, Sir Chief Mitchell is one of the most competent maintenance chiefs I've ever worked with. If you have specific concerns about her qualifications or conduct, I'd like to hear them. Her qualifications aren't in question, Commander. It's her identity that concerns me. The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Sarah felt 8 years of careful hiding finally crumbling around her. Rodriguez knew. He had always known. The only question was why he hadn't acted on that knowledge before now. Sir, Jake said carefully, I'm not sure I understand what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Commander Thompson. I'm stating a fact. The woman standing beside you is not Senior Chief Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell. She is Lieutenant Commander Katherine Sullivan, who was declared dead 8 years ago after being investigated for treason against the United States Navy. Sarah felt the world tilt around her. For 8 years she had prepared for this moment, had rehearsed denials and explanations and desperate attempts to maintain her cover, but now that the moment had arrived, she found herself strangely calm. The game was finally over, the masks finally removed. Whatever happened next would determine not just her fate, but the fate of everyone who had been caught up in the conspiracy that had destroyed her life. That's impossible, Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah could see him processing the information, connecting dots that he had perhaps been unconsciously avoiding. Katherine Sullivan died in a training accident. Katherine Sullivan's death was carefully staged to provide her with a new identity and the opportunity to disappear, Rodriguez replied. What we didn't anticipate was that she would be foolish enough to return to the scene of her crimes. Her crimes, Jake's voice was rising, drawing attention from other personnel on the flight line. What crimes? The investigation never produced any evidence that she was actually guilty of treason. Rodriguez's smile was thin, predatory. The investigation produced exactly the evidence it was designed to produce, Commander. Sometimes the greater good requires certain accommodations with the truth. Sarah watched this exchange with growing understanding. Rodriguez wasn't just revealing her identity, he was confessing to the conspiracy that had destroyed her life. But why? What did he hope to gain by admitting his guilt in front of Jake Thompson? You framed her. Jake said, the pieces finally clicking into place. You manufactured evidence, staged her death, and let everyone believe she was a traitor. I protected the Navy from a scandal that would have compromised national security and destroyed careers that were vital to our defense capabilities. Katherine Sullivan stumbled onto classified information that she wasn't authorized to possess, and she refused to understand the larger strategic implications of what she had discovered. "What information?" Sarah asked quietly. It was the first time she had spoken since Rodriguez had revealed her identity, and both men turned to look at her. There was no point in maintaining the fiction of Sarah Mitchell any more. That woman had served her purpose and could now be set aside like a uniform that no longer fit. "You know what information, Lieutenant Commander Sullivan. You discovered that certain high-ranking officers were providing intelligence to foreign services in exchange for strategic information that helped prevent larger conflicts. You couldn't see the bigger picture. The bigger picture being that you were selling out American servicemen and women for personal profit." Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. "The bigger picture being that sometimes smaller betrayals prevent larger wars. The information we provided helped diffuse 3 potential international incidents that could have led to armed conflict. American lives were saved." Jake was staring at Rodriguez with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. "And my father, how did Captain Thompson fit into your bigger picture?" Rodriguez's expression hardened. "Your father was an idealist commander. He couldn't understand that sometimes the greater good requires compromises with absolute moral purity." When Lieutenant Commander Sullivan approached him with her concerns about the classified material she had uncovered, he should have advised her to let sleeping dogs lie. Instead, he encouraged her to pursue the investigation. "So, you killed him." "I arranged for him to have an accident that prevented him from compromising a vital intelligence operation. His death was regrettable but necessary." Sarah felt the rage that she had been suppressing for 8 years finally breaking free. Mark Thompson had died because of his loyalty to her, because he had believed in her innocence and refused to participate in the conspiracy to destroy her. And Rodriguez was admitting it with the casual indifference of someone discussing routine maintenance. "How many people did you murder to protect your little spy ring?" she asked. "As many as necessary, including you if you hadn't been clever enough to stage your own death and disappear." Rodriguez checked his watch with the casual air of someone keeping a routine appointment. "But your luck has finally run out, Lieutenant Commander. In approximately 30 minutes, Admiral Patterson is going to order your arrest on charges of desertion, impersonating a naval officer, and conspiracy to commit treason." Sarah felt the trap closing around her with mathematical precision. "And what makes you think Admiral Patterson will follow your orders?" Rodriguez's smile was genuinely amused. "Because Admiral Patterson has been part of this operation from the beginning. She was the one who suggested staging your death, who helped create the Sarah Mitchell identity, who has been monitoring your activities for the past 8 years. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Admiral Patterson, who she had thought might be an ally, who had seemed to question the official story, who had implemented the security measures that Earl Washington claimed were designed to draw Katherine Sullivan out of hiding. She had been working for Rodriguez all along. "You're lying," Jake said, but Sarah could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Admiral Patterson understood, as I did, that certain sacrifices were necessary for the greater good. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan had to be neutralized, but her death had to appear accidental to avoid questions from her supporters in the Navy. The staged training accident served both purposes." Sarah's mind was racing, trying to process the implications of Rodriguez's revelations. If Patterson was part of the conspiracy, then the enhanced security measures weren't designed to protect Katherine Sullivan, they were designed to capture her. The intelligence reports, the surveillance photographs, Earl Washington's midnight revelations, it was all part of an elaborate trap. "What about Earl Washington?" she asked. "Was he part of your conspiracy too?" Rodriguez's expression flickered with what might have been annoyance. "Master Chief Washington is a complication that I hadn't anticipated. He's been conducting his own investigation for several years, and he's managed to uncover information that could prove embarrassing if it became public. Embarrassing enough to have him killed, if necessary." Rodriguez's casual tone made the threat even more chilling. "But I'm hoping that won't be required. Master Chief Washington is a patriot despite his misguided loyalty to your memory. I believe he can be convinced to see reason." Jake stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Admiral, you're describing a conspiracy that includes multiple murders, treason, and a cover-up that has lasted 8 years. Do you really think we're going to let you walk away from this?" Rodriguez's hand moved to the sidearm holstered at his waist, a casual gesture that nonetheless carried unmistakable meaning. "Commander Thompson, you're going to do exactly what you're ordered to do, just as your father should have done 8 years ago." Before anyone could respond, the sound of approaching aircraft filled the morning air. Sarah looked up to see a formation of helicopters approaching from the east, their rotors beating a steady rhythm against the dawn sky. But these weren't cut Navy helicopters. They bore the distinctive markings of the FBI. Rodriguez followed her gaze and cursed under his breath. "It appears that Master Chief Washington has been busier than I realized." The helicopters touched down on the far side of the flight line, and Sarah watched as armed agents poured out and began spreading across the base with military precision. Whatever Earl Washington had set in motion, it was bigger than a simple attempt to draw Katherine Sullivan out of hiding. "Admiral Rodriguez," a voice called out from across the tarmac. "FBI, you're under arrest." Rodriguez's hand tightened on his sidearm, but he was surrounded by federal agents before he could draw the weapon. As they secured him with handcuffs, he looked directly at Sarah with an expression of pure hatred. "This isn't over, Lieutenant Commander Sullivan. There are others involved in this operation, others with more resources and fewer scruples than I possess. Your little resurrection has made you a target that will never go away." As Rodriguez was led away, Sarah found herself standing alone with Jake Thompson on the flight line where her career had been destroyed 8 years ago. The Blue Angels aircraft sat nearby, their blue and gold paint gleaming in the morning sun, waiting for pilots who might never come. "So," Jake said quietly, "Katherine Sullivan. Yes. You've been hiding here for 8 years, working as a maintenance chief, watching the Blue Angels fly the aircraft you once commanded." Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was necessary." Jake was quiet for a moment, studying her face with the same intensity his father had once shown when trying to solve a complex problem. "Why didn't you come forward sooner? Why didn't you try to clear your name?" "Because I had no proof. Because everyone who might have supported me was dead. Because Rodriguez and his co-conspirators had spent years building a case against me that was airtight in every detail except the truth." Sarah paused, looking up at the sky where she had once felt most alive. "And because I was afraid that if I revealed myself more, good people would die. Like my father. Like your father." Jake nodded slowly, and Sarah saw acceptance in his expression, not just of her identity, but of the choices she had made to protect the people she cared about. "What happens now?" Before Sarah could answer, Earl Washington appeared from the direction of the FBI helicopters, his civilian clothes replaced by a federal agent's windbreaker. The transformation was startling. The elderly retiree was gone, replaced by someone who moved with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding complex operations. "Lieutenant Commander Sullivan," Earl said, extending his hand. "Special Agent Earl Washington, FBI. I apologize for the deception, but it was necessary to maintain operational security." Sarah shook his hand, still trying to process the revelation. "You're not a retired Master Chief." "Actually, I am. 25 years in the Navy, followed by 15 years with the Bureau. I've been investigating the Rodriguez conspiracy for the past 3 years, ever since one of his co-conspirators approached us with information about illegal intelligence sales." "And Admiral Patterson," Earl's expression became grim. "Admiral Patterson has been cooperating with our investigation for the past 6 months. The enhanced security measures, the intelligence reports about threats to the Blue Angels, it was all part of an operation designed to force Rodriguez into revealing the extent of his conspiracy." Sarah felt a wave of relief so intense it was almost overwhelming. Patterson hadn't been part of the conspiracy, she had been working to expose it. The trap hadn't been designed to capture Katherine Sullivan. It had been designed to capture Rodriguez. "How long have you known who I was?" Sarah asked. "I suspected from the moment I saw you working on those aircraft yesterday. Your knowledge, your instincts, the way you looked at those FA-18s, it was obvious that you weren't just a maintenance chief." Earl smiled. "But I needed Rodriguez to reveal himself, to confess his crimes in front of witnesses. Your presence here gave us the perfect opportunity to make that happen." Jake was looking back and forth between them, clearly struggling to keep up with the revelations. "So Katherine, Lieutenant Commander Sullivan, is she cleared of all charges?" The charges against Lieutenant Commander Sullivan were based on fabricated evidence and perjured testimony. As of this morning, she has been fully exonerated and reinstated to active duty with her full rank and privileges. Earl paused, his expression becoming serious. "However, Rodriguez was correct about one thing. There are others involved in this conspiracy, people with resources and connections that we haven't yet identified. Katherine Sullivan may be cleared legally, but she's not necessarily safe." Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. Her resurrection had exposed Rodriguez and his immediate co-conspirators, but it had also made her a target for anyone who remained in the shadows. The choice she faced now was the same one she had confronted 8 years ago: remain hidden and safe, or step into the light and fight for justice. Lieutenant Commander Earl continued, "You have choices to make. You can return to active duty, accept a new assignment, and let us handle the remaining aspects of this investigation. Or, Sarah prompted, or you can help us finish what you started 8 years ago. We have evidence against Rodriguez and several of his co-conspirators, but we need someone with your knowledge and experience to help us understand the full extent of the conspiracy." Sarah looked up at the sky where the Blue Angels should have been practicing their precision maneuvers, preparing to inspire another generation of aviators with their demonstration of excellence and teamwork. Instead, the aircraft sat silent on the tarmac, their pilots grounded by a conspiracy that had been festering in the heart of the Navy for nearly a decade. "What about the air show?" she asked. "What about the Blue Angels?" Jake stepped forward, his expression resolute. "The Blue Angels will fly, Lieutenant Commander. Tomorrow, in front of 50,000 people, we'll take to the sky and show the world that the Navy's commitment to excellence can't be compromised by corruption and conspiracy. And I'll be watching from the ground, as I have for 8 years. "No," Jake said firmly. "You'll be in the cockpit where you belong, flying with the team that you helped create, showing everyone who Katherine Sullivan really was and what she really stood for." Sarah stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "That's impossible. I've been out of the cockpit for 8 years. My flight status was revoked. My qualifications expired. Your flight status has been fully restored as of this morning." Earl interrupted. "Admiral Patterson's orders. And as for your qualifications," he smiled, "I suspect that riding a bicycle is easier to remember than flying an FA-18, but they're both things you never really forget." As federal agents continued their work around the flight line, as the sun climbed higher over Pensacola Naval Air Station, as the Blue Angels aircraft waited patiently for pilots who would take them into the sky, Sarah Mitchell finally allowed herself to die. In her place stood Lieutenant Commander Katherine Sullivan, back from the dead, ready to reclaim not just her name and her rank, but her place in the sky where she had always belonged. The conspiracy that had destroyed her life was beginning to crumble, but the hardest part still lay ahead. Tomorrow, in front of thousands of people, she would have to prove that 8 years of hiding hadn't erased the skills that had made her a legend. She would have to show the world that Katherine Sullivan hadn't died in the Gulf of Mexico. She had been reborn in the maintenance hangars of Pensacola, tempered by loss and strengthened by the knowledge that the truth was worth fighting for, no matter what the cost. The Blue Angels would fly again, and this time Katherine Sullivan would be leading them home. The silence that followed Earl's declaration stretched across the flight line like a held breath, broken only by the distant sound of FBI agents securing evidence and the steady hum of aircraft systems on standby. Katherine stood motionless beside Jake Thompson, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of what had just been offered to her. 8 years of hiding, 8 years of watching others fly the aircraft she had once commanded with unmatched skill, 8 years of believing that Katherine Sullivan would remain forever buried beneath the carefully constructed facade of Sarah Mitchell. "You're serious," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You want me to fly tomorrow? I want you to take your place where you've always belonged." Jake replied, his brown eyes intense with conviction. "The Blue Angels aren't just about demonstration flying, Katherine. They're about showing the world what the Navy stands for: honor, courage, excellence. Rodriguez and his conspirators tried to destroy that legacy, tried to turn our finest pilots into symbols of corruption and betrayal. Tomorrow you can help us reclaim it." Katherine looked toward the 6 FA-18 Super Hornets, sitting in perfect formation, their blue and gold livery gleaming in the morning sun. Blue Angel 1, the lead aircraft, seemed to call to her across the tarmac with a voice she hadn't heard in 8 years. But between her and that cockpit lay a chasm of lost time, degraded skills, and the terrifying possibility that the pilot she had once been might no longer exist. "Jake," she said, using his first name for the first time, "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but you don't understand what you're asking. 8 years out of the cockpit isn't just a gap in experience. It's a fundamental disconnection from everything that made me who I was. The Katherine Sullivan who could lead the Blue Angels died in that explosion over the Gulf of Mexico." No, she didn't. The voice belonged to Admiral Patterson, who was approaching from the direction of the command post, with a stride that conveyed both authority and urgency. Her gray hair was pulled back in its characteristic severe bun, but her expression held something Katherine had never expected to see: respect, tinged with what might have been regret. "Lieutenant Commander Sullivan, that woman you think died 8 years ago has been alive every day since working in these hangars, maintaining these aircraft, keeping the Blue Angels flying with a level of expertise that no ordinary maintenance chief could possess." Katherine came to attention automatically, the muscle memory of military discipline overriding 8 years of practiced invisibility. "Admiral Patterson, ma'am." "At ease, Katherine. We're well past the point of formal protocol." Patterson's tone was gentle, almost maternal, as she studied Katherine's face with the intensity of someone seeing a ghost made flesh. "I want you to know that not a day has passed in the last 8 years that I haven't regretted my role in what happened to you." "Your role?" Katherine felt a chill run down her spine. "Earl said you were helping with the investigation, that you've been working to expose Rodriguez." Patterson's expression grew somber. "That's true, but it's not the whole truth. 8 years ago, when you first brought your concerns about the intelligence leaks to my attention, I should have protected you. Instead, I allowed myself to be convinced by Rodriguez that the situation required delicate handling. I believed his assurances that he would conduct a thorough but discreet investigation that would protect both you and the Navy from scandal." The admission hit Katherine like a physical blow. She remembered that meeting 8 years ago, remembered trusting Patterson with the evidence she had uncovered about classified information being sold to foreign intelligence services. She had believed that Patterson would act on that information, would protect her from retaliation, would ensure that justice was served. "You gave Rodriguez my evidence," Katherine said, the pieces finally falling into place. "You told him everything I had discovered. I gave him the opportunity to explain the irregularities you had found, believing that there might be legitimate explanations I wasn't aware of. I thought I was protecting you from making accusations that could destroy your career if they proved unfounded." Patterson's voice was heavy with regret. "Instead, I gave him everything he needed to frame you as a traitor and arrange your death." Jake stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Admiral, are you telling us that you were complicit in the conspiracy against Katherine? I'm telling you that I was naive enough to believe that the system would protect an innocent person and corrupt enough to prioritize the Navy's reputation over one officer's life. Patterson met Jake's accusing stare without flinching. When I realized what Rodriguez had done when Captain Thompson started asking questions and then died in that suspicious training accident, I understood that I had helped facilitate something monstrous. Katherine felt the weight of 8 years of betrayal settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. The woman she had trusted, the superior officer she had believed would protect her, had been the instrument of her destruction. But she also heard something else in Patterson's voice, genuine remorse and a determination to make amends that went beyond mere words. "Why didn't you come forward then?" Katherine asked. "Why didn't you expose Rodriguez when you realized what he had done?" "Because I was a coward," Patterson replied simply. "Because I was more concerned with protecting my own career than with seeking justice for you. Because I convinced myself that you were dead, and that destroying my career wouldn't bring you back." She paused, her eyes never leaving Katherine's face. "But when Earl's investigation began to uncover evidence that you might still be alive, when we realized that Rodriguez was still active and still dangerous, I knew I had to find a way to make things right." Earl Washington approached the group, his FBI windbreaker making him look more like a federal agent than the retired Navy veteran he had pretended to be. "Admiral Patterson has been instrumental in our investigation for the past 6 months, he said. "Her cooperation has allowed us to gather evidence against Rodriguez and his network that would have been impossible to obtain otherwise. And now you want me to fly tomorrow as some kind of vindication?" Katherine's voice carried an edge of bitterness that 8 years of suppressed anger had sharpened to a razor's edge. "You want me to perform for the crowds, to smile and wave and pretend that everything is forgiven and forgotten?" "I want you to fly because you're the best pilot the Blue Angels have ever had," Jake said firmly. "I want you to fly because your father taught me that sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to prove that their sacrifices meant something. I want you to fly because 50,000 people tomorrow deserve to see what excellence looks like when it's not corrupted by politics and conspiracy." Katherine looked at Jake's face and saw his father's stubborn idealism shining through the same quality that had gotten Mark Thompson killed 8 years ago. But she also saw something else, something that gave her pause. She saw a young officer who understood that some principles were worth dying for, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage was refusing to let evil triumph through the simple expedient of good people doing nothing. "Even if I wanted to fly," she said, "even if I could somehow convince myself that 8 years away from the cockpit hadn't destroyed my skills. There are practical considerations. I don't have current flight gear. I haven't been through recent safety briefings. I don't know the current demonstration routine." "All of that can be handled," Patterson interrupted. "Your flight gear is being delivered as we speak. The safety briefings can be conducted this afternoon. As for the demonstration routine," she smiled for the first time since Katherine had known her, "the current Blue Angels demonstration is based on modifications you made to the original routine 8 years ago. The muscle memory is still there. We just need to help you remember." Katherine felt the walls of her resistance beginning to crumble. The practical objections were being stripped away one by one, leaving her with only the fundamental question that had haunted her for 8 years. Was she still the pilot she had once been, or had Catherine Sullivan died in that explosion? After all, leaving behind only a shadow who worked in maintenance hangars and dreamed of touching the sky. "There's something else you need to know," Earl said, his expression growing grave. "Our investigation has uncovered evidence that Rodriguez wasn't acting alone. There's a network of officers throughout the Navy who have been involved in illegal intelligence operations, and they're not going to simply surrender because we've arrested their leader." "What does that mean?" Jake asked. It means that Katherine's decision to come forward has made her a target. These people have invested too much in maintaining their cover to allow one pilot, no matter how innocent, to expose their crimes. Earl's voice was grim. We have intelligence suggesting that there may be an attempt to eliminate Katherine during tomorrow's air show. Katherine felt a familiar chill run down her spine, the same sensation she had experienced 8 years ago when she first realized that her life was in danger. But this time, instead of fear, she felt something else stirring in her chest. Anger. Pure, clean anger at people who thought they could murder innocent servicemen and women to protect their corruption. Let them come, she said quietly. Katherine, Patterson started to protest. No, Admiral. I've spent 8 years hiding, 8 years living as someone else, 8 years letting these bastards think they had won. If they want to try to kill me, let them do it in front of 50,000 witnesses while I'm flying the aircraft I was born to fly. Katherine's voice was steady, but Jake could hear the steel beneath the surface. At least this time when I die, it will be as Katherine Sullivan. Jake felt a surge of admiration for this woman who had endured 8 years of exile and emerged with her courage intact. You won't die, he said firmly. Not on my watch. Not while I'm flying as your wingman. Wingman? Katherine looked at him with surprise. Jake, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm volunteering. My father died trying to protect you 8 years ago. Tomorrow I'm going to finish what he started. Earl nodded approvingly. Actually, that fits perfectly with our security plan. We'll have federal agents integrated into the crowd. Air traffic control will be monitoring for unauthorized aircraft, and the entire demonstration will be conducted under enhanced security protocols. But having Jake as your wingman provides an additional layer of protection. Katherine looked from Jake to Patterson to Earl, seeing in their faces the same determination that had once driven her to pursue the truth about the intelligence leaks, despite the personal cost. These people were offering her something she had thought lost forever, the chance to fly again, to serve her country again, to prove that Katherine Sullivan had been innocent all along. But they were also offering her the chance to die as herself, rather than as the carefully constructed fiction of Sarah Mitchell. And perhaps she thought that was worth the risk. All right, she said finally, I'll fly. The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment before Jake broke into a grin that transformed his serious face completely. Outstanding. We have about 6 hours before the final briefing, which gives us time to get you back into the cockpit and see if you remember how to fly one of these beasts. As they walked toward Blue Angel 1, Katherine felt something she hadn't experienced in 8 years: anticipation. The FA-18 Super Hornet loomed before her like a technological cathedral, its sleek lines and predatory grace representing the pinnacle of naval aviation engineering. She had flown this aircraft hundreds of times, had pushed it to its absolute limits, had made it dance through the sky with a precision that had brought tears to the eyes of spectators around the world. But that had been 8 years ago, when Katherine Sullivan was young and confident and believed that skill and dedication were enough to overcome any obstacle. Now she was older, scarred by betrayal and loss, carrying the weight of secrets that had nearly destroyed her. The question that remained was whether the pilot she had been could survive the transformation into the woman she had become. Before we get started, Jake said as they approached the aircraft, there's something I need to tell you about the current Blue Angels routine. What about it? It includes a maneuver that was never performed during your original tenure with the team, something that was developed specifically to honor the memory of Katherine Sullivan. Jake's voice became quiet, reverent. We call it the Phoenix Rising. It's a solo climb to 15,000 feet followed by a spiral descent that ends with a low pass over the crowd. The pilot performs it alone, separated from the formation, as a tribute to those who died in service to their country. Katherine stopped walking, her hand resting on the aircraft's wing. You've been flying a memorial maneuver for me. The entire Blue Angels organization insisted on it. Despite the official story about your treason, despite the classified nature of the investigation, despite orders from above to forget you ever existed, the pilots knew better. They knew what kind of person you were, what kind of pilot you were, and they refused to let your memory be destroyed by lies and cover-ups. Tears that Katherine hadn't allowed herself to shed in 8 years began to flow down her cheeks. I never knew. How could you? You were dead, remember? Jake's smile was gentle understanding. But tomorrow, you're going to perform that maneuver yourself. You're going to show the world that Katherine Sullivan didn't die 8 years ago. She was just waiting for the right moment to rise again. As they began the pre-flight inspection that would prepare Blue Angel 1 for its most important mission, in 8 years, Katherine felt the ghost of Sarah Mitchell finally fading away. In her place stood a naval aviator who had been tested by fire and emerged tempered into something stronger than she had been before. The sky that had once been her home was calling her back, and this time she was ready to answer. The FBI agents continued their work around the base, gathering evidence and securing the area for tomorrow's demonstration. Admiral Patterson coordinated with her staff to ensure that every aspect of the air show would proceed despite the morning's dramatic revelations. Earl Washington monitored communications channels for any sign that Rodriguez's co-conspirators might be planning retaliation. But for Katherine, the world had narrowed to the cockpit of Blue Angel 1 and the familiar ritual of preparing an aircraft for flight. Her hands moved over the controls with the muscle memory of thousands of hours in the air, checking systems and settings with the automatic precision that separated truly great pilots from merely competent ones. And with each switch thrown, each gauge verified, each system confirmed operational, she felt more of Katherine Sullivan returning from the dead. "You know," Jake said as he watched her work, "I think my father would have been proud to see this." Katherine looked up from the instrument panel, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Your father was the best wingman I ever flew with, Jake. He saved my life more times than I can count, and when the end came, he died trying to save it one more time. Then let's make sure his sacrifice meant something. Let's show the world tomorrow that the good guys can still win, that corruption and conspiracy can't triumph over truth and courage." As the sun climbed toward its zenith over Pensacola Naval Air Station, Katherine Sullivan prepared to take to the sky once again. Tomorrow would bring 50,000 spectators, television cameras, and the most important demonstration flight in Blue Angel's history. It would also bring whatever retaliation Rodriguez's co-conspirators might attempt, whatever final desperate measures they might take to prevent their crimes from being fully exposed. But today, in the quiet moments before the storm, Katherine allowed herself to remember what it felt like to be a pilot again. She remembered the weight of the helmet in her hands, the feeling of the control stick responding to her slightest touch, the incredible sensation of pushing an FA-18 through maneuvers that defied both physics and common sense. She remembered what it was like to be Katherine Sullivan, and for the first time in 8 years, that memory didn't bring pain. Tomorrow the Blue Angels would fly. Tomorrow Katherine Sullivan would rise from the dead. And tomorrow the truth about corruption and conspiracy and the price of honor would be written across the sky for everyone to see. The ghosts of Pensacola were finally ready to be laid to rest, but not before they had told their story one last time in the language that naval aviators understood best, the pure poetry of precision flight performed at the edge of human capability, in defiance of gravity and fear, and the forces that sought to keep good people grounded forever. The morning of the Gulf Coast Thunder Air Show dawned clear and brilliant, with visibility stretching to the horizon and winds that whispered rather than roared across the tarmac at Pensacola Naval Air Station. Katherine stood in the pilot's ready room at 0500 hours, her hands steady as she pulled on the blue flight suit that she hadn't worn in 8 years. The fabric felt foreign against her skin, yet familiar in ways that transcended conscious memory. The weight of the material, the placement of the pockets, the way the zipper ran smoothly from chest to throat. "Like riding a bicycle," Jake said from across the room, his own preparations complete. He was watching her with the kind of protective intensity that his father had once shown, and Katherine felt a pang of loss so sharp it nearly took her breath away. Mark Thompson should have been here for this moment, should have seen his son preparing to fly as her wingman in the most important demonstration of their careers. "I hope it's that simple," Katherine replied, checking the seals on her G-suit for the third time. The familiar ritual of pre-flight preparation was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because her hands remembered every step, terrifying because she was about to test whether 8 years of exile had destroyed the instincts that had once made her legendary. Admiral Patterson entered the ready room with the brisk efficiency that had characterized her entire naval career, but Katherine caught the subtle tension in her shoulders that suggested she understood the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Behind her came Earl Washington, now openly wearing his FBI credentials, his weathered face grim with the knowledge of threats that remained unspecified but very real. "Final intelligence briefing," Patterson announced. "We've identified 3 individuals with connections to Rodriguez's network who remain unaccounted for. 2 are retired naval officers with extensive special operations backgrounds. The 3rd is a current contractor with access to military facilities." Katherine felt the familiar pre-combat clarity settling over her mind like a well-worn glove. Any indication of their specific intentions? Communications intercepts suggest they intend to make a statement during today's demonstration. The exact nature of that statement remains unclear, but we have to assume they mean to eliminate you before you can testify about Rodriguez's conspiracy. Jake straightened in his chair, his expression hardening. "What's our security posture? FBI agents integrated into the crowd air traffic control under federal oversight, and 3 F-16s from Eglin Air Force Base maintaining a combat air patrol above the demonstration area," Earl replied. "But understand that if these individuals are determined to act, they have multiple vectors of attack available to them." Katherine nodded, her mind automatically calculating angles and contingencies with the tactical awareness that had kept her alive through combat deployments and high-risk demonstrations. "What about ground-based threats? Covered. Every building within 5 miles of the airfield has been swept. Every rooftop that could provide a sniper's position is under observation." Earl's expression was professionally neutral, but Katherine heard the underlying concern in his voice. "The most likely scenario is an attempt during your solo maneuver, the Phoenix Rising. When you separate from the formation, you'll be most vulnerable to both ground-based and airborne threats." The Phoenix Rising, the memorial maneuver that the Blue Angels had created to honor her memory, and which she would now perform as Katherine Sullivan rather than as a ghost. The irony was not lost on her. She would be most vulnerable at the moment when she was symbolically rising from the dead. "Then we modify the routine," Jake suggested. "Keep the formation together, eliminate the solo work." "No." Katherine's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. The people who come to these air shows deserve to see the Blue Angels perform at their absolute best, not some watered-down version designed to keep one pilot safe." Patterson leaned forward, her expression intense. "Katherine, these people killed your father, killed others who threatened their operation. They won't hesitate to kill you if it serves their purposes. Then they'll have to catch me first." Katherine stood and walked to the window that overlooked the flight line where 6 FA-18 Super Hornets sat in perfect formation, their blue and gold livery gleaming in the morning sun. "Admiral, with all due respect, I didn't survive 8 years in hiding just to die afraid. If Rodriguez's people want to try to silence me, let them do it while I'm flying at 400 knots 50 feet off the deck." Earl moved to stand beside her, his voice quiet, but carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades hunting dangerous people. "Katherine, I understand your need to prove something today, but do you—" Katherine turned to face him, her eyes blazing with 8 years of suppressed fury. "Do you understand what it's like to have your identity stripped away, to watch other people live the life that was stolen from you, to know that the people who destroyed everything you cared about are still out there, still free, still believing they can murder anyone who threatens their comfortable corruption?" The room fell silent, and Katherine realized that her voice had risen to nearly a shout. She took a deep breath, forcing herself back under control, but the anger remained cold, clean anger that had been refined by 8 years of loss into something harder than steel. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "but I need you all to understand something. Katherine Sullivan died 8 years ago because she was naive enough to believe that doing the right thing would be enough to protect her. Sarah Mitchell lived these past 8 years by being invisible, unremarkable, forgotten. But today, I'm neither of those people. Today, I'm someone who has seen the worst that human beings can do to each other and who has chosen to fight back anyway." Jake stood and moved to join her at the window. "Then we fight together, the way my father and Katherine Sullivan fought together 8 years ago." Katherine felt tears threatening again, but she pushed them down. There would be time for grief later, time to mourn Mark Thompson and all the others who had died because they refused to compromise with evil. Today was for action, for redemption, for proving that sometimes the truth was strong enough to overcome even the most sophisticated lies. "Final brief in 30 minutes, Patterson announced. "Weather is perfect, aircraft are mission ready, and the crowd is already gathering. Whatever happens today, we're going to give them a show they'll never forget." As the others filed out of the ready room, Jake lingered behind with Katherine. "There's something I need to tell you before we fly," he said, his voice unusually serious. "What is it?" "Last night I called my mother, told her about everything that had happened, about who you really are, about what we're planning to do today." Jake paused, his expression soft with memory. "She said she wanted me to give you a message." Katherine waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. "She said that my father talked about you constantly after your supposed death, said you were the finest pilot he'd ever known, the most honorable officer he'd ever served with, and that if there was any justice in the world, you would somehow someday get the chance to fly again." Jake's voice became thick with emotion. "She wanted you to know that the Thompson family never believed, the official story never stopped believing in your innocence, and never stopped hoping that you were somehow still alive." The tears came then, despite Katherine's best efforts to maintain control. 8 years of isolation. 8 years of believing that she was alone in the world. 8 years of thinking that everyone she had cared about had either died or abandoned her. All of it dissolved in the face of Jake's simple message of faith and loyalty. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me after we land safely and the bastards who killed my father are behind bars where they belong." The next hour passed in a blur of final preparation systems checks and the ritualized precision that preceded every Blue Angels demonstration. Katherine strapped herself into the cockpit of Blue Angel 1 with hands that shook only slightly, her fingers finding the familiar controls with the muscle memory of thousands of hours in the air. The FA-18's engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, and she felt the aircraft respond to her touch like a living thing welcoming back a long-lost friend. "Blue Angel 1, you are go for taxi," came the voice of the tower controller, professional and crisp, despite the extraordinary circumstances surrounding today's flight. "Blue Angel 1 taxi," Katherine replied, her voice steady over the radio, as she eased the throttles forward and felt 18 tons of military aircraft begin to move beneath her hands. The taxi to the end of the runway took on an almost ceremonial quality, with FBI agents and military personnel lining the taxiways in a show of support that brought fresh tears to Katherine's eyes. These were her people, the men and women who served their country with honor and dedication, and they were telling her in the only way they could that Katherine Sullivan was welcome home. At the end of runway 06, Katherine held Blue Angel 1 in position, while Jake and the other 4 pilots of the demonstration team formed up behind her. Through her canopy, she could see the crowd that had gathered to watch the air show. 50,000 people spread across the viewing areas, their faces turned skyward in anticipation of the aerial ballet they were about to witness. Tower Blue Angel Flight of 6, request departure for demonstration. Blue Angel flight cleared for takeoff. Godspeed, Katherine. The controller's breach of protocol, using her first name instead of her call sign, sent a surge of emotion through Katherine that she channeled into pure focus. Her right hand closed around the throttles, pushing them smoothly forward to full military power. The FA-18's twin engines responded with a roar that she felt in her bones, and Blue Angel 1 began its acceleration down the runway. At 150 knots, Katherine pulled back gently on the stick, and for the first time in 8 years, she left the Earth behind. The sensation was indescribable, a combination of joy, terror, relief, and homecoming that overwhelmed every conscious thought and left her operating on pure instinct. The aircraft climbed away from Pensacola Naval Air Station with the smooth power that only a perfectly maintained military jet could deliver, and Katherine felt herself becoming one with the machine in a way that transcended mere mechanical control. Blue Angels, this is Pensacola Tower. You are cleared into the demonstration area. Good hunting, Katherine. The demonstration began with the traditional diamond formation pass. At 400 knots and 50 feet, the 6 FA-18s moving in perfect synchronization across the length of the airfield. Katherine led them through a series of loops, rolls, and formation changes that had been choreographed to showcase both the aircraft's capabilities and the pilot's skills. But for her, the maneuvers were more than just aerial entertainment. They were a declaration that Katherine Sullivan had returned from the dead, that lies and corruption could not permanently suppress the truth that sometimes the good guys really could win. 15 minutes into the demonstration, Katherine reached the moment she had been both anticipating and dreading. Blue Angels, this is lead, preparing for Phoenix Rising. Break formation on my mark. 2 ready, 3 ready, 4 ready, 5 ready, 6 ready. Jake's voice came last, steady and reassuring. Good hunting, Katherine. See you on the other side. Katherine rolled Blue Angel 1 inverted and pulled away from the formation, climbing steeply toward the scattered clouds at 15,000 feet. Below her, the Gulf Coast spread out in shades of blue and green, beautiful and serene and completely oblivious to the drama being played out in the sky above it. At the top of her climb, Katherine rolled the aircraft upright and began the spiral descent that would take her back toward the airfield at nearly the speed of sound. The maneuver required split-second timing and absolute precision, too fast or too shallow, and she would overshoot the runway, too slow or too steep, and she would arrive too high to make the dramatic low pass that concluded the Phoenix Rising. It was during the third turn of her descent that Katherine's threat warning system began to scream. Blue Angel lead, this is Eglin Control. We have an unknown aircraft approaching your position from the northwest. No transponder not responding to radio calls. Katherine's training took over her hands and feet, making the minute adjustments necessary to continue her descent while her eyes scanned the sky for the threat. She found it at her 2 o'clock position, a small civilian aircraft, probably a modified aerobatic plane approaching on an intercept course that would bring it directly into her flight path. Eglin Control, Blue Angel lead, has the unknown aircraft in sight. Appears to be on an intercept course. Blue Angel lead, recommend immediate evasive action. F-16s are moving to intercept. But Katherine was committed to the maneuver, now diving toward the Earth at over 400 knots, with barely enough altitude remaining to pull out safely. If she broke off now, the resulting climb would take her directly into the path of the approaching threat aircraft. Negative Eglin Control, I'm continuing the approach. She rolled the FA-18 into a steeper dive, trading altitude for speed, as she watched the unknown aircraft close the distance between them. Through her canopy, she could see the pilot's helmet could make out what looked like some kind of weapon mounted beneath the aircraft's wing. Rodriguez's people had found her after all, and they intended to complete the job they had started 8 years ago. But Katherine Sullivan was no longer the naive pilot who had stumbled onto their conspiracy 8 years earlier. She was something harder now, something tempered by loss and refined by 8 years of living with the knowledge that evil people would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. And she was flying an FA-18 Super Hornet, one of the most capable fighter aircraft ever built. The unknown aircraft opened fire when the range closed to less than a mile, its machine gun spitting tracer rounds that streaked past Katherine's canopy like deadly fireworks. But the pilot had made a fatal error. He had tried to lead her turn, had anticipated that she would break off her dive and climb to avoid the attack. Instead, Katherine rolled inverted and pulled the FA-18 into a dive so steep it was nearly vertical, using the aircraft's superior speed and maneuverability to slip beneath the gunfire and continue her approach to the airfield. The unknown aircraft flashed overhead, its pilot fighting to bring his slower, less maneuverable machine around for another attack. Blue Angel lead, this is Eglin 1-1. We have tone on the unknown aircraft. Request permission to engage. Negative, Eglin 1-1, I've got this. Katherine pulled out of her dive at less than 100 feet, the G-forces pressing her deep into her ejection seat as the FA-18 transitioned from a near vertical descent to level flight in a maneuver that pushed both aircraft and pilot to their absolute limits. Below her, the crowd scattered as they realized that something had gone terribly wrong with the demonstration, but Katherine wasn't done yet. She rolled the aircraft through a series of high G turns that brought her around behind the unknown aircraft, which was struggling to match her speed and agility. The pilot was good, probably military trained, definitely experienced, but he was flying an aircraft that had been designed for aerobatics, not air-to-air combat. Unknown aircraft, this is Blue Angel lead. You are ordered to land immediately at Pensacola Naval Air Station. Comply immediately or face the consequences. The response came in the form of another burst of machine gun fire, this time from dead ahead, as the unknown pilot attempted a head-on attack. Katherine smiled grimly and rolled the FA-18 into a barrel roll that carried her over and around the incoming fire, emerging on the attacker's 6 o'clock with perfect firing position. Of course, Blue Angel 1 carried no weapons. The FA-18s used for demonstration flying were stripped of their combat systems to reduce weight and improve performance. But Katherine had something better than weapons. She had superior speed, superior maneuverability, and 8 years of suppressed rage at the people who had destroyed her life. She closed to within 50 feet of the unknown aircraft and held position there, her wingtip less than 10 feet from the other pilot's canopy. At this range and speed, any sudden movement by either aircraft would result in a mid-air collision that would kill them both. But Katherine had already died once. She had nothing left to lose. Unknown aircraft, this is your final warning. Land immediately or I will force you down. For a moment, the two aircraft flew in perfect formation, predator and prey locked in a deadly dance that was being watched by 50,000 people on the ground and millions more on television. Then the unknown pilot made his choice, rolling his aircraft away from Katherine's FA-18 and diving toward the airfield in what appeared to be compliance with her order. But Katherine's instincts, honed by years of combat flying and sharpened by 8 years of paranoia, screamed a warning. The dive was too steep, the approach angle too aggressive. The pilot wasn't trying to land, he was trying to crash into the crowd, to take as many innocent people with him as possible in a final act of terrorist vengeance. Eglin control, Blue Angel lead. The unknown aircraft is making a kamikaze run on the crowd. I'm moving to intercept. Blue Angel lead, you are not armed. Repeat, you have no weapons. Roger that, but I've got something better. Katherine rolled the FA-18, inverted, and pulled it into a dive that would intersect the unknown aircraft's flight path directly over the crowd viewing area. She had perhaps 10 seconds to prevent a massacre, 10 seconds to prove that Katherine Sullivan's resurrection meant something more than personal vindication. The two aircraft converged at over 400 knots, their combined closing speed approaching 800 miles per hour. At the last possible moment, Katherine made a minute adjustment to her flight path, bringing the FA-18's wing into contact with the unknown aircraft's tail in a maneuver that required precision measured in inches and timing measured in fractions of seconds. The collision was devastating but controlled. The unknown aircraft's tail section separated completely, sending the machine tumbling out of control toward the empty water of Pensacola Bay. Katherine's FA-18 shuddered under the impact, several warning lights illuminating on her instrument panel, but the aircraft remained flyable. Below them, the crowd that had been in mortal danger just seconds before stood in stunned silence, watching as the unknown aircraft crashed into the bay in a pillar of smoke and flame. Katherine pulled her damaged FA-18 into a climbing turn, checking her instruments and assessing the aircraft's condition. Blue Angel Lead, this is Pensacola Tower. Are you okay up there? Pensacola Tower, Blue Angel Lead. I've got some damage, but the aircraft is controllable. Requesting immediate landing clearance. Blue Angel Lead, you are cleared to land any runway, any direction. Emergency equipment is standing by. But Katherine had one more thing to do before she returned to Earth. She rolled the FA-18 into a gentle climbing turn that brought her over the crowd one final time, then executed a victory roll that was visible for miles in every direction. It was a gesture of triumph, a declaration that Katherine Sullivan had not only returned from the dead, but had proven herself worthy of the second chance she had been given. The landing was smooth, despite the damage to her aircraft, and as Katherine taxied clear of the runway, she could see Jake and the other Blue Angels pilots already on the ground, their aircraft parked in perfect formation as they waited for their leader to return. But it was the sight beyond them that brought tears to her eyes, thousands of people lining the taxiway, cheering and waving American flags in a spontaneous celebration of her safe return. Earl Washington was waiting for her as she shut down the engines and opened the canopy. Outstanding flying, Katherine. The pilot of that unknown aircraft didn't survive the crash, but we've already identified him as Marcus Webb, a former Navy SEAL who was part of Rodriguez's network. Katherine removed her helmet and climbed down from the cockpit, on legs that were only slightly unsteady. Any word on the other threats? All accounted for. FBI teams arrested the other two conspirators this morning based on intelligence we gathered from Rodriguez. The network is finished. Admiral Patterson approached with Jake close behind both of them, wearing expressions of relief and admiration that made Katherine's ordeal of the past 8 years seem suddenly worthwhile. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan, Patterson said formally, on behalf of the United States Navy, I want to apologize for the injustice you suffered and to thank you for your service both past and present. Your actions today prevented a massacre and demonstrated the kind of courage and skill that defines the very best of naval aviation. Katherine stood at attention as Patterson continued. By order of the Chief of Naval Operations, you are hereby reinstated to full active duty with all privileges and honors. Your record has been cleared of all adverse actions, and you will receive the Distinguished Flying Cross for your actions during today's demonstration. The crowd's cheering grew even louder as word of Katherine's vindication spread through the gathering. But for Katherine, the real validation came from Jake Thompson, who stepped forward and extended his hand with a smile that reminded her powerfully of his father. Welcome back, Katherine. My dad would have been proud. As Katherine shook Jake's hand, she felt the last of Sarah Mitchell finally fade away, replaced by the woman she had always been meant to be. The conspiracy that had destroyed her life was finished, its architects dead or imprisoned, its victims finally vindicated. The truth had prevailed after 8 long years, and Katherine Sullivan had risen from the ashes of her supposed death to reclaim not only her name but her place among the finest pilots in naval aviation. The Blue Angels would fly again, and Katherine Sullivan would lead them, carrying with her the hard-won knowledge that sometimes the price of honor was higher than anyone should have to pay, but that it was always, always worth paying. She had touched the face of God once more, and this time she had come home to stay.